Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Time Extend. My name is Adam Ismail. Joining me today, as always, is
Brendan Norrison. And Adam, it has been a while. We're finally getting around to recording another podcast. I don't even want to say the L word because it feels like every time we have a hiatus we always just go, that's life. But it really has been recently. There's been quite a few changes in your life going on and mine's as well in terms of busyness and such, and that damn Atlantic Ocean that splits our time zones and such also adds a bit to the chaos, but we're finally back together. How have things been going in the world of racing games for you, Adam, before we get into our topic?
Ooh, the world of racing games. What have I been playing? Well, aside from more recently, obviously Need For Speed Underground, not a whole lot. You know, I found myself like dipping into GT7 with every update, as you do, and then I got tired of that, as I know many of us have. We don't need to talk about that because that's a whole podcast unto itself.
Yeah.
And yeah, otherwise, I'll tell you what, I was recently traveling to drive a car for my job, and on the plane, I was flying from Philly to California, and I spent like almost the whole trip just playing Wreckfest on the Switch. So
Really? How's the port? I've heard it's actually really good.
yeah, it's not bad. I mean, it's very blurry because it's a PC port on Switch and it's 30 FPS, but it's fun. It's all of Wreckfest in the palm of your hand, so can't really complain. And I love Wreckfest, so it was a good time.
Yeah, you have kind of made a few glowing recommendations about it. I've seen in some of your articles and stuff that you kind of throw in those references and stuff, and to be honest, like, it's been a heavy racing game portable side for me as well, having got the Steam Deck recently.
Yeah.
And I actually have Wreckfest in my Steam library, which I do not have downloaded, and now I'm like, maybe I give it a go on Steam Deck if I've already got it there, since I think the Switch port was still like, well, $35 for you guys, I assume, and then like £35 for us.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was a full price game, but I think like I found it on a sale or something like that, or maybe it was a little bit below full price, but yeah, I mean, if I had a Steam Deck, that's what I would do. How are you enjoying it?
It's been fantastic.
Nice.
Definitely a niche device. The one thing about the Steam Deck is that people who have one can't shut up about the emulation and stuff on it, and admittedly I've kind of fallen into that hole myself. It's a very cool device. It definitely doesn't feel as if it's something like the Switch that could be a mainstream hit, mostly because it looks like it came from the 80s or something. It's not the most aesthetic device in the world. But the kind of the control layouts and the performance for playing games has been spot on. I've had my biannual return to Forza Horizon, this time through the Steam Deck, playing Horizon 5 up until the last update broke it, which is, I guess, a caveat of using like Linux-based gaming.
Right.
But yeah, I've put in like about 60 hours of gameplay on the thing so far, but 20 of those were Forza Horizon 5, and then there's been various other games and stuff. The emulation is obviously bang on, so I've been playing a lot of stuff there. And then surprisingly outside of that, it's just been kind of rhythm game stuff. So it's been a nice device. It's helped make games more accessible. So for the two games we're talking about today, I have been playing them strictly on Steam Deck. That has been my kind of platform of choice.
Wow, okay.
And it has been a oddly, I guess, liminal experience in a way, because I remember playing these games on the Steam Deck as I remember playing Need For Speed Underground on the PSP. Like I feel as if I've actually experienced that before, but obviously it isn't. But that's the nostalgia goggles we're always up against when we do these podcasts. So it's a bit of a strange experience now, having what we wanted to have when we were kids, I guess, in the palm of our hands for the Steam Deck. And any emulation device, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it seems like the ideal portable gaming device, and maybe one day I'll get one, maybe when they come out with V2 or whatever, because for a long time, I really was disappointed with the idea, sort of after the PSP, where everybody decided to say, like, oh, we don't need, like, full-size console games on a portable system. And I know that it doesn't always turn out well, but, like, I don't know, I enjoy, like, Outrun 2006, for example, on the PSP. I played that game a lot, just like I played Outrun 2 on the Xbox, and they're both full, console quality games. So I don't really see why, short of something like Assetto Corsa, we have to like, scale down games for portable systems. So yeah, I would love a Steam Deck. I was on the plane for another trip a couple months ago, and there was a guy next to me who was playing it, and I try to mind everyone's space and not really talk to anyone on the plane, because like I don't know how people are, and it gets awkward because you're sitting next to somebody and you're like, oh, we're gonna talk for the entire flight. But at a certain point, I was just like, hey, is that a Steam Deck? And he was very nice. He was like, yeah, he's like, you want to hold it? So I like held it in my hands for a minute, and I was surprised how light it was, because you look at it and you think it's going to be this fucking girthy thing, and it's just like, it's actually just a lot of like, it feels sturdy, but it feels like there's a decent amount of air in there, which actually isn't such a bad thing. So,
especially for a first gen attempt, because obviously the design of the thing is very much it invokes feelings of a first successful attempt at a device like this. But like you say, if it's already that light, it matters a lot because of the size of the thing. Like if it was heavy and that size, it would be pretty difficult to kind of get working in people's hands correctly, even if it does only have like a 2-hour battery life for kind of challenging games and stuff. But it is a cool device, and it was the perfect go-to for me for returning to Need for Speed Underground 1 and 2 to break the veil, of course, about what we're talking about today. We did, of course, cover a lot of Need for Speed with Casey, and she was able to give some great inputs on that series. And I think at the time, the reason we said we would kind of skip over Underground was because everybody had talked about it, but now with Unbound on its way, it feels as if it's the perfect time to actually give it a discussion. And well, I know for sure you've got a lot to say about these games, Adam, which I'm really curious to hear about as well.
Yeah, so in the run-up to this show, I actually I picked up Need for Speed Underground 2 early in the pandemic when we were all looking for things to do, right? And I played it a little bit, but I didn't play it a lot, and it just didn't stick with me. So when we decided that we were going to do this show, I was like, all right, let me kind of fire these games back up again. And I played both. I didn't play either a lot because I've been super busy, admittedly. I played, hours of each, but part of the reason that I got stuck, especially with the second one, was because there were a lot of like game progression issues that they needed to figure out. And this being like one of the first open world racing games, at least like modern open world racing games with Underground 2, they were definitely like on their way to figuring that out. So I don't like, I was kind of outspoken in almost like a shitposty way about how I felt about these games. And I don't think they're bad games at all. I really don't. Like, it might surprise people. It's just that we all have that problem, right, with Need for Speed, where it's like, it tends to dominate the conversation when it maybe doesn't deserve to completely. Like, a lot of people are annoyed at like Most Wanted, the original Most Wanted these days, because it's just like, we saw it with the time extend with the bracket, like Racing Madness, like the M3 GTR is ubiquitous. People come in, say it's the best racing game ever made. If you played lots of our racing games, chances are you may view it highly, and it is a very good game, but you might be like, hey, what about, XYZ? That's kind of how I feel. I actually really do love Most Wanted 2005 a lot. It is one of my favorite racing games of all time. But that's kind of how I feel about Underground in a nutshell. It's a little overhyped, just a little bit. But that's where I'm at. And I'm, of course, coming to this as someone who, like, I don't have the nostalgia that a lot of people have for Underground, because I skipped these games when they came out. So I'm interested to hear about your background with this, Brent.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was very much a childhood experience, and quite a prominent one as well, actually. It was the game of the playground, so to speak, when it came out. Distinctly remember post the kind of the festive period when it came out, a lot of people in my primary at the time got it, and it would be what we talked about during break. Like, everybody would talk about Need for Speed Underground and talk about the fact that their dad had the Corsa that was in the game, or that sort of thing, like in terms of starter cars and all that sort of thing. So there was definitely a buzz for this game that was probably the first time for me outside of Gran Turismo that a mainstream racing game really kind of pierced the ether in terms of mainstream conversation. So there is a lot of that to get over for me when I return to these games, because it's viewing it through that lens. And I'll be honest, every time I hear that EA track sanitized version of the fucking iconic song, like, it's an absolute blast of the past. Because before we get started on the serious stuff, there's a pretty funny story about me with that song where it's like...
You're talking about Get Low, right?
Oh yeah, of course, Get Low.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
sorry. I sometimes just figure it doesn't have to be mentioned.
Just want to state it.
So, obviously this game was the introduction to this song for me, and it's the first time I'd heard it, and it was pretty much the only place I was hearing it, because, well, I wasn't going to listen to songs like that when I was younger in terms of explicit versions and stuff. I wasn't even allowed to play GTA for many, many years.
Right.
So, I remember the first year at university, I went to like a house party, and the song was playing, and I was like, oh man, I fucking love this song, it's fantastic. And then it gets to the kind of the main chorus where, of course, it's changed to dance, and it just like copy pastes that over the lyrics.
Yeah.
And that, like, literally when I was 19, that was the first time I'd ever heard the non-censored version, so I didn't have a clue that part was even censored in the song, because the only time I'd ever listened to the song, I heard it when it was in Need For Speed Underground, when I played it when I was younger. So, like, for at least best part of a decade, I was under the assumption that was the correct version of the song. And then, of course, it wasn't.
So we all know what is being said in the actual version of the song. I actually, because when I started Underground, I didn't know that Get Low was like the title track for Need for Speed Underground. So when I heard that immediately, I was just like, I just died laughing. But how does the censored version go? Because I thought, it seemed to me that they only censored the cussing, but they actually left all of the slang that is really just as bad, but maybe I wasn't paying full attention.
There is quite a few changes, I think, and if there is a YouTube version, we should definitely listen to it after the pod, just on stream, just so you can hear it. This is actually something that really annoys me, right? Like, see, for everything the internet archives and like keeps track of, old commercials, old lost media, all that type of stuff, there isn't a YouTube channel that catalogues all the censored versions of EA tracks, because there are some absolutely hilarious examples in there, and obviously Need for Speed Underground is one of them. But we should listen to it. But there's quite a lot of changes, like they kind of cut over some lyrics and just completely censor others, but they also change the context of some of the lyrics as well, if I remember right. So it is quite different. Okay, that's interesting, because I was hearing like they censor over the B word, but I thought I heard them still say let's just sweat drop down my balls. I thought I kept hearing that, but maybe no. I wasn't hearing that. So, okay. That whole section, they just repeat the part of the vocal. Okay. They just elongate it so it covers the entire like interjections from Mr. Lil Jon, I suppose. Wow. All right. Because I guess what it is my exposure to that song, which actually is, I mean, it's pretty cursed being a little kid and hearing that. And I guess if you don't know and they censor it, it's whatever. But the first time I heard that song, I might have heard it before this, but the first time I can remember was actually at my 8th grade dance, like end of the year dance. Some adult DJ thought it would be okay to play this song in a room full of 13 and 14-year-olds, which is about as bad a thing as you can do. But they did it because of Need for Speed Underground. I guess so. It all makes sense. I guess so. So it's but I mean, what can be said, right? What hasn't been said about Lil Jon's Get Low? It's a wonderful song, and the soundtracks in these games, and this might be like the most positive thing I say about these games, but like they're just fun. I'm kind of amazed. Like, I remember with Burnout 3, I think it was Burnout Revenge. Burnout Revenge had Dance Dance by Fall Out Boy, and I remember that when I heard that song, like I played the game, and Revenge probably came out at the end of the year because it tended to be one of those like tentpole holiday releases, and then like
in in January of the next year, all of a sudden I heard like Dance Dance everywhere. Like, and that was when Fall Out Boy became like the biggest band in the world. And I feel like they were almost really good at finding these things. Maybe people who were listening to like rap at the time, right? Maybe they knew about this song, but like it hadn't cracked the mainstream, and they were able to find that moment just before it did and capitalize on it. And this game was probably, part of the reason why. I mean, for all of my personal issues at the time with like, Need for Speed's going tuner and everything, and I love Hot Pursuit 2, this was like a really smart move in like every possible way. Like, I totally understand why they did it, and that's kind of reflected in the soundtrack too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was a trend with EA in general, wasn't it? Across like the SSX and stuff as well. I feel as if they were really good at identifying these tracks that would then become popular, and there's obviously a few kind of Need for Speed exclusive tracks in here. I think P.T. Pablo has a song called Need for Speed in the soundtrack as well, and yeah, I think the soundtrack is a really core part of the overall culture of the game, and to bring it back to overall thoughts about the first game especially.
Yeah,
that kind of vibe of the game was something that in the mainstream people just assumed had never been done before, and it kind of popularised it from that. I'm not sure how close in tandem this released to Fast and Furious, the first film, or like what kind of era they shared, but it definitely feels as if there was a capitalisation on that part.
Yeah, when was the first Fast and Furious? That's definitely worth looking up, because yeah, this is when street racing and that whole tuner thing culture just exploded in the mainstream. So this game would have come out, Underground would have been 2003, the first one, so 2 years after the first Fast and Furious. And those movies were releasing, that would have been the same year as the second Fast and Furious. So yeah, just a smart move all around. I understand why they did it. Looking through the soundtrack again, I think it's funny that they relegate this like old idea that like hip hop is good for, when you're browsing the menus and stuff like that and you're tuning your ride. But if you want real, muscle and adrenaline, you need to listen to some rock. But I actually, like, one of the first things I did was I turned on, because you can choose where the songs play, and I was like, no, I want to hear Get Low when I'm driving. Why wouldn't I want that? Like, come on. And there's actually, I love the website Need for Speed Soundtrack, because it's such a great repository for the soundtracks of every single racing game that's ever been released. And there are a number of songs that were supposed to be in the game and were deleted. There were Most Def, Miss Fat Booty 2 with Ghostface Killah, which the original Miss Fat Booty is like one of my favorite rap songs ever. It's just a phenomenal song. Talib Kweli and some more Most Def and KRS-One. There's a lot of stuff that didn't make it to the final game for whatever reason, which is kind of disappointing.
I wonder if it was the eligibility of enough censorship in terms of maintaining the spirit of the song and that sort of thing, whilst also removing the lyrics that had to be removed. I do love the fact that they tried so hard to get these types of songs in there, though.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that surprising to me to hear a song like Get Low in this game, because Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, which I've said numerous times is like my favorite Need for Speed and one of my favorite racing games ever, the hot action cop songs in that game they're just as bad. They're probably worse if you think about the songs contextually a little bit more. But for those songs, they replaced every single lyric was replaced with, they made the song, they changed it from being about women to being about, driving on the limit and going through the turns and all this shit. And then they also added a bunch of like improvisational lyrics that were just syllables that didn't make any sense. So EA definitely knew what they were doing here. That's for sure.
Yeah, like I say, that I really would, if I had the means and time to do it, I think there's a lot of mileage potentially for an account dedicated to cataloguing all the censored versions of EA songs, because there's some absolute classics even from NHL and stuff over the years that are just incredible. But yeah, back to Need for Speed Underground. So I mostly played through the first game. Adam, you kind of focus more on the second game, or kind of revisit of the series. Did you get around to playing the first game as well?
Yeah, I played a decent amount of the first game. The beauty of the first game is it's so kind of simple that I felt like I just played it for like a solid 5-6 hour sitting one day, and I was like, right, that's Need for Speed Underground. But yeah, I'll let you continue on it.
No, absolutely. So, I spent a lot of time playing the first game and basically tried beating it for the first time since completing it in tandem with my cousin way back. Naturally, I didn't actually quite get to the end. Not just because of time constraints, but we'll get on to the AI side of things of this game in quite some time. But yeah, my return to this game has been one that has been very enjoyable, but also one that gets very repetitive very fast. I think when you kind of first play the game, I really appreciated the linearity of it, because it was just like, here's 3 races, go do these races, here's how you earn upgrades and stuff. But once you see the pattern of how the game actually progresses, you really start to see where it's pretty rigid and just not that enjoyable for what the game's supposed to be about. So it's supposed to be about customization and it's supposed to be about kind of performance enhancements to your cars and going through the ranks, that sort of thing. But then the game's progression actually unfolds in a way that is very iterative anyway. So like, it isn't until you get to the very late game you can start to have actually a bit more freedom to build what you want to build, compared to just what you've recently unlocked and naturally plugging that on to build up your reputation bar for the cars. When it came to the customization side of things, I'll be honest, during the career playthrough I didn't really give it that much mind in the end, because if you go into quick race anyway, you can just build your dream cars out, which is pretty cool. You get access to everything minus the cars you unlock later on. But in terms of actual career progression, it was so iterative that it definitely felt as if Black Box were coming from the type of game they had made previously, as opposed to what is required for a street racer, and why that is appealing. I feel as if, ironically, Underground is probably even though it was the entry point for it, it definitely feels like it, because it's just too iterative for this type of game experience, I would say.
It's a really interesting game because you look at the design, the visual design of it and what it's about and the furniture of it, and they present you with a full map and you think, okay, open world street racer, right? But it's not open world, and it's like they were kind of relying on you, like games of a previous generation, to sort of connect the dots in your head, make it feel like it was a bigger experience than it actually was. Where in reality, I would say this game, it is just very iterative, and it's just like you have a bucket of events, you do them, you move on to the next thing. Sometimes you have to upgrade your car to qualify for the next class of events. Sometimes those require visual modifications, which is something I really don't like, but we can get into that later. But it's, in some ways, it actually feels kind of smaller than Hot Pursuit 2, because you don't have the variability of pursuits. You know, those are out of the game. You have like the drifting mode, which was novel for the time, and I find fun. But those almost kind of feel like mini games, because like the tracks you're on, they're just it feels like you're driving around. God, what's the map from Call of Duty with the shipping containers? I can't remember what the hell it's called, but it's like you're just driving.
I think it's just called Shipment.
Oh, Shipment, right? Yeah, it's like you're driving around Shipment. It's like, this is, you know, to devote a whole mode when you were going to only do this with it feels a little bit, you know, not what it should be. And again, like in terms of like fundamentals, like I think the physics are fine. You know, graphically, it's, I think with the first game you benefit where they're not trying to do too much. So while there are frame drops, they are reasonable. And I think I actually found, because I was emulating the GameCube version when I played Underground 1, that like when I switched into the bumper cam, that the frame rate was much smoother, which I don't know if that was a quirk of emulation or if that's how the game actually played on original hardware, but I thought that was pretty funny. And yeah, it's funny. It really surprisingly feels, and because it's black box and it's built off of their technology for Need for Speed Underground 2, for Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, it was funny how there were so many moments, and just like watching the way the cars move and just the physics and that camera, whenever you like go into the air, you crash into a car, where I was like, yeah, this feels like it's built atop the technology of the previous game, but they just moved it to a different place. And yeah, I mean, it was a perfectly serviceable experience for me, but I mean, as someone who grew up with different street racers, I didn't really, it didn't sink its hooks in me.
Yeah, I think like there's kind of Fat Scout in the chat there has just said like this is the game that tries to ham up the illegalness of all of this and the underground racing scene and all of that type of thing, but it does actually drop things like the police, the hot pursuits. It almost creates this more kind of structured environment followed by structural game design as well, because there's the magazine system, which serves like no purpose really, as well, like in terms of like it's some sort of variation, I guess, on the gameplay, but really the issue I find with this game, and Underground 2 does remediate it quite a bit, it's too kind of iterative and progressive for it to actually feel like some sort of underground racing scene when it is so structured like that. And we've said it a million times, we do love a linear racing game, but because the kind of MO of this game is more about trying to harness that underground racing culture and the street racing side of it, and even compare against like Total Extreme Racer and that sort of thing, there's like a definite gap in terms of what those games were going for and what this game is going for. I did actually enjoy the racing side of it up until a certain point. Like I feel as if the driving's actually pretty fun. I do actually quite like the drift mode as well, if not for the ridiculousness of the scores you can set and stuff from the drifting. Like it does get pretty intense as well, because the rubber band AI also impacts that mode in some capacity, so you can get in some crazy heated battles even if you're absolutely smashing it. And drag racing, I'm not a big fan of drag racing. I never really have in games.
I'll actually say the drag racing mode in this game I think is one of the best drag racing modes of any game that's tried to do it, because like you'll see a lot of games will do the R Racing Evolution thing where it's like drag racing, but ultimately you're just pressing the accelerator and going straight, and if you're using manual transmission then there's that too. But this game they force you to use manual, which makes a lot of sense. There's kind of like a little bit of a golf meter style mini game to like getting your revs where they need to be when you take off, and then you have the modern mobile game equivalent of picking your lane, having to move jostle from like left to right to avoid various kind of non-player cars and other obstructions and things like that, and drafting. So it is one of those things that honestly you just do the same event over and over again until you memorize, okay, that's where that truck's going to be. All right, I'll move over here. But it feels more substantial than, the way that drag racing tends to go in a lot of racing games. So I actually didn't mind it.
Yeah, I think the kind of concept is obviously very unique compared to games that are racing that would do it. Maybe it's just because I was terrible at it. I didn't quite get on with it as much.
It can be hard.
Every time
Yeah,
especially when the traffic ramps up in the later stages, it can be a reset for the best in terms of hoping that the opponents go into the traffic and not you.
They save all of their traffic in this game for the drag racing. I mean, that's always my gripe with open world Need for Speeds, is the cities feel desolate. And the only time they don't feel desolate in this game is when you're doing drag racing, because then every single person that day decides to be on the road. Yeah, exactly.
That's it. It's actually pretty funny, like with the traffic in this game, because obviously they have the massive neon indicators for where the circuit is, and then like the traffic cars just go right through them. And I wonder if it's just like these guys travelling home from work and stuff, and they're like, oh, there's the street racers out with their neon signs again. I wonder who'll stop them. But yeah, it just feels too safe. The first game, it doesn't really actually kind of embody the underground racing scene enough in terms of what they're going for. Actually, the gameplay is fun for me. I do enjoy it. It gets repetitive as the game goes on. It's weird saying it, but it just feels like a few hours too lengthy as well. There comes a point where you feel as if you're kind of getting that crescendo with the gameplay and getting to the final boss races and that sort of thing, and it just sort of keeps going. And then that's when the rubber band AI really kicks it up a gear. And I like the physics in this game, but it's weird. I feel as if Black Box racing games in general have this issue where they just don't. They become really frustrating in close counter races for me. I feel as if like the collision physics and stuff can be real killers, and as soon as you make one slight mistake, and the kind of environment collision elements can be amazingly frustrating. Like, I remember I get caught off guard revisiting this game because I hit a tree and just assumed to go right through it because I've been playing Forza Horizon.
Yeah.
It's just immediate standstill, like, nah, you're not going anywhere, kid. Lost like a 7-second lead.
There's one track when you start the game that comes up a couple of times in like the first series of races, and it's got like, it passes a building that looks kind of like a museum or something, and it has these angled steps. And I kept, like, as I would drive past it, the way, like, those steps kind of come to a point right in the apex of a corner. And as I've played a lot of Midnight Club lately, like old school Midnight Club and other games, I'm like, oh, if I just hit that, I can just like continue going and hop over it and clip that for the apex. But no, it will stop you dead. It's I think like these black box games were very rigid in terms of, you know, you look at Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 and the engine that they had for that, and it wasn't the kind of game where you could go anywhere because it was a linear circuit racer. And this game, even though they kind of use similar assets for everything because it builds out into a big city, is still a linear circuit racer. And so you can't go everywhere. And it makes the game... It's that moment that reminds you, like, all right, I'm playing an old Need for Speed. You know, it's not like you ever have that moment of surprise where it's like, I can't believe I just did that. I can't believe I just jumped over that or whatever. Where, like... I would feel that way playing like Midnight Club 2 and 3 so many times because those maps were just teeming with secrets and stuff. And I feel like when people talk to me or just in general about like why they love these games so much, I feel like no one really ever talks about the city. And I feel like that's almost an admission that it's because it's not very interesting. I don't know. I just, a game like this, and especially a second game, which is open world, they need to have a really good city as a base. And if you don't have that, like, open world that just makes you want to keep, like, finding every corner of the map and give you set pieces to look at and be like, oh, that's really cool. If you don't have that, then everything just kind of feels almost a little bit pointless.
I think as well, the risk-reward of shortcuts in this game is so heavily skewed towards risk that it does become... very difficult to justify trying to explore the linear tracks as much as possible because you mentioned the word jump in there and gave me Vietnam-style flashbacks of trying to actually take the shortcuts that require jumps in this game, because when you get cars that are fast enough and you try and take those shortcuts, you better be sure that you go in at the right trajectory and you better be sure that you're at the right speed as well, because... It seems like Black Box watched the first Fast and Furious film and seen like the Supra and the Charger jump over the railway track with the cool camera angle, and they went, oh, we want that in our game. And it means that anytime you do a jump, you get that camera angle where it kind of pivots to the front and shows you your car jumping. Yep. But I think I would be very surprised if more people than not can say for sure that it always looked cool and didn't look as if they'd absolutely fucked up the jump. It was just like the car flying vertically through the air and spinning or falling to pieces.
It's like the way that the shot is angled, the car is supposed to be in one place and it's not in that place at all. It's actually over here, facing the wrong direction, sliding against the wall. Yeah.
My Peugeot 206 and more often than not mid-spin or fucking vertical smashing off the ground. It was skill issue, of course. Right. It's so hard.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up because that was a big thing with Hot Pursuit 2 was they really were proud of this idea of alternate paths, and they that word choice to describe that is very deliberate because they didn't mean shortcuts. Not every single path you took was going to save you time or be advantageous for you to win the race. And sometimes it would even, like, it would be a path that would take you off asphalt, so you would have less grip, and if you weren't as good a driver, then it would be difficult to navigate. And that did make Hot Pursuit 2 feel very special, but I feel like there's a limit to that, right? It's like, you gotta... Some of the shortcuts have to be gimmies, and some of them can be like, oh, this looks good, but it's actually not going to help you. Yeah. And if you just make every single path that way, then, like, what's the point, right? I'll just stick to the street. So I definitely understand what you're saying when you say like risk and skewing more towards risk than reward.
It also gets to that point as well where the rubber banding is an intentional part of the game design, and if you take a shortcut, that time gets made back up anyway, like by the next straight or something. So it did get to the point where by not taking the shortcuts, I wasn't doing myself an injustice in terms of trying to win the race, unless of course the AI were ahead of me and took that shortcut. But whenever I was in the lead, I would kind of purposely try to avoid them just because it's just like you either get it right or you've mucked up your full race. And rubber banding AI is relatively fine in the sense that if it goes both ways, but in this game it is very much a case of like if you're in the lead they will catch you, but if you fall behind it is very hard to come back into the race. And in the later races, while it's intense, it does get kind of frustrating because you kind of have to restart every time you make a fuck up, that sort of thing.
And the rubber banding too, because it's so severe and one-sided, it really puts a damper on what tuning your vehicle, what upgrading it's going to actually do for you. I saw some people in the Discord saying like, yeah, ultimately it doesn't really matter if you upgrade your car because like the AI will just rise to that level of speed. And when I started Underground 1, I chose a Dodge Neon just because I thought it was hilarious that a Dodge Neon was in the racing game and it wasn't the SRT4. I thought that was really funny, and I needed to pick a Dodge Neon because I grew up on like awful Chrysler cars. My family kept buying them. But like, yeah, I didn't want to upgrade my Neon at all because I just wanted to save my money for a better car, and I also thought all of the visual customizations look terrible. But there comes a point in the game where you have to buy. It's not just like, oh, your car needs to be a little faster. It's like you need to buy every upgrade that's available now if you want to move to the next series of races. And it just, God, I hated that. Like, I really don't like it when a game's like, and I mean, Need for Speed Underground 2, I remember, because that was the first one I played out of these two games like 2 years ago. And like when I found it's like, oh, I have to get my rating up to a certain level, I'm like, that would be fine if the parts in this game didn't look terrible, but they look so bad. So like, and they're also like, they look bad because they're just generic parts. They're not actually like, they don't pertain to any car. They're just reused for every single car. Yeah. Except some of the more custom, one-off vehicles and things like that. So I enjoy customization and stuff like that in racing games when it's done really well and the parts look great, like they do in Tokyo Extreme Racer or something like that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I think as well, whilst we're kind of talking a bit about Underground 2, we can probably pivot to just focus on that now as well, because there isn't much else to be said for the first game.
Sure.
It's definitely has its place in racing game history. I think its kind of cultural impact is probably, it's a bigger footprint than say Midnight Club's attempts to that point, but Midnight Club up until that point definitely had the upper hand, I think, in terms of what they were putting out there gameplay wise.
Yeah, and I was someone who, as we talked about in the Midnight Club show, which wasn't that long ago, at least in the episode count, I played Midnight Club 2, had a great time with it. Midnight Club 3 was where I absolutely fell in love with the series, and honestly, when I play these games, I'm just like, I just wish like Midnight Club did this. Why couldn't they do it? Like that's a feeling I keep having when I play Underground, for better or worse. Yeah. But yeah, with Underground 2, I feel like the first game, sometimes you have that sense where like a game, the first kind of attempt in like a series, or in this case, kind of a sub-series of Need for Speed, the first attempt is not what the developers want it to be, and it's not like there was any issue with development or anything like that. So they didn't have the time, and they had this grand vision, but they were never going to get there in the first run. And 2 feels like the completion of that. 2 actually feels like a big game where there is a lot to do. And 1, it almost feels like the Ridge Racer 6 to Ridge Racer 7 thing. It's like you guys released sort of like a demo really early, and it's really impressive that this demo sold super well. But 2 is where you see those ideas start to come to life. And it actually amazed me because of how different conceptually the 2 games are, being rigid and open world, like how different they feel, even though the physics and stuff are very similar. it's honestly amazing that there's only like a year separating them.
Yeah, I think if like you were to get modern remasters of these two games, you could probably get away with calling the first game Prologue, and then changing Need for Speed Underground 2 to Need for Speed Underground,
right.
And it would have that kind of relationship, because obviously even the start of Need for Speed Underground 2 kind of takes on from where the first game left off, but of course you're still starting from scratch again, just the way it goes in any street racing form of media. Like whenever there's a sequel or something, it's like every one of your efforts before is gone. But yeah, 2 right away scope wise, you absolutely notice the difference. There's just comparing them is weird, because 2 does feel as if it's a game that if you really like the linearity of the first game and that's why you were playing it, like 2 would have just caught you so far by surprise, because there's just a lot more going on here, and it does actually feel more like a realisation of the concept, like you're saying.
Yeah.
I still find it very weird playing Underground 2, because I still feel as if the physics are still more geared towards closed circuit racing, if that makes any sense. Like I don't really feel as if it's a game that encourages the exploration of the city and stuff, and I know game design wise it's still very early days as far as like kind of open world game design went and such, so you're not going to see like, I don't know, like Burnout Paradise's billboards and that sort of thing throughout, but it's the city itself definitely still feels as if it's built for the races as opposed to a kind of living place that the story is taking place in.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how this being Black Box's first attempt at a truly open world game, you can kind of skip the open world portions to a certain extent, because there's always a list of core races that you can access from your garage and just go straight to. But then there's other events that you actually have to browse the map for. And I think like there are a lot of aspects of this game that feel kind of rough. And I don't think it's because they like, I don't think it's because they didn't think about it. I think it's because it is because they didn't think about it, but not out of like a genuine like pointed lack of care from the beginning. It's that they didn't anticipate the problems that like players were going to have. So like honestly, like it progression as far as I made in this game, which is not very far, has taken ages, because like there are points where it's like I thought they did all the races. Oh, I have to do these races with like the X marks on the map. They're not accessible from the garage. Okay. So I'll go and do those. And then I'm still waiting. Like, I'm still like, okay, what? I'm waiting for a text or something on my singular wireless phone. Like, why can't I move on to the next thing? It's like, oh, I have to upgrade my car. It's a low visual. Oh, yeah, let me go do that. So I did that. I'm like, still nothing. Like these are things that developers had to figure out. The only way they figured them out was by, players having issues. So I totally get it, but, I had to dig into some FAQs, very, very old FAQs from when the game came out to figure out what to do. Yeah. And there's a section of this first one I found on GameFAQs that's just devoted to like, all right, so you're stuck at 19%. Have you done this? Have you done this? If you haven't done this, maybe try this. If you've done all those things, I don't know. Like, it's pretty frustrating, because, today we can look back on it with the perspective of like, if you just have like some sort of place that a player can go to see like, this is the thing you need to do, that would solve every problem. But, they were figuring it out as they went along, clearly.
I guess from Black Box's perspective as well, it's the first time they tried something like this, and I guess minor hot take within the episode, I don't think any of Black Box's open world games truly shined to me. I'm just not really a fan of their games when they do take out of that environment that much, with the exception of Carbon. I really like Carbon, but yeah, that's a podcast episode in its own right, I guess. But yeah, I mean, Chris has just said in the Twitch chat as well about the hidden races along the map, which of course would help with the progression and that sort of thing, but I think like that kind of plays into this idea that I like the mystique of finding that sort of thing, but it's also good to have more kind of slight hints kind of guiding you there. And I imagine there are maybe some text and stuff that come through the singular phone. I can't remember.
They give you, the problem with that is they give you so much stuff, especially early in the game. It's like, have you tried turning off traction control? It's like, I just want to, can you just tell me what to do? Like, not like walk me through the options. there's like
It's an entitled attitude, mate.
Yeah, there's cars that like roam the map that you can just challenge to, you know, an impromptu street race, and the way that they're called like outrun events, which is funny in its own right. And the way that they work in this game is it's sort of the Tokyo Extreme Racer thing, because like you want to be ahead of your rival for a certain length of time, but it's actually not length of time so much as it's like actual distance. So like you need to build a massive gap to the guy you're racing against in order to beat him. And these events, they are of like dubious significance to like campaign like progression, so I've been avoiding them for the most part. But like, it's because of the rubber banding, which is still in this game. It's so hard. It took me like 12 minutes to win the first one I did, and I only won it because like I was able to force this guy into this part of the map, it like wedged into a corner where there was no way the AI was going to figure out how to get out of this. That's the only way I was able to beat them, because like I would get a gap of, you know, you need a gap of probably like 8 to 10 seconds, and it's a lot. And yeah, it's kind of funny how like those things that you don't expect to really phase you much end up being like the most difficult aspects of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially once you get into the later game elements. The difficulty of these games, it's good to go back to a time, I guess, when it isn't just all on your plate. I think one of the biggest issues with racing games nowadays is you've either got games that just tell you to make your own difficulty, or you have games that are just way too easy from start to finish. Black Box's kind of original two underground games for me are definitely up there in terms of it really does push you to focus and actually concentrate on the driving quite a lot, which is a positive, I suppose. But the rubber banding can get very frustrating once again. And I think like for me, upon revisiting the game as well, I feel like the driving engine here is still really fun, and for me that's important, because I feel as if when you move to an open world type game, you're going to have a lot of dull travel in between. Mm-hmm. So it's good that the physics do feel still very tight and stuff, it's just that they don't actually feel geared towards exploration, as daft as that sounds. But the good thing is the city is fairly kind of horizontal in nature. There isn't much verticality in terms of hidden areas to find or jumps and that sort of massive jumps and that sort of thing. So it's for me, I feel as if with Underground 2 it was very much a case of this is what the first game should probably be, and therefore my opinion felt very similar. The expansion of the concept is obviously good to see, but I don't think it was a case where if you really didn't like the racing in the first game, you're probably going to feel the same in the second game, I would say. Yeah,
and should add to that, Acquire 86 mentioned here that those outrun events that we were talking about, they could give you special parts, which are horrible, but they give you a lot of reputation. But that's a toss-up, right? Whether you're going to get those or not. And like, if they're horrible parts, like it's a thing where it's like, well, I have to use this for rep, or for visual to achieve a certain rating, but you may not want to. These games have a lot of quirks like that. One thing I will commend the second one on is like, and I wanted to talk about this with the first game, but we weren't able to get to it, but we can discuss it now retroactively, is the car list. I find the car list in the first one is baffling, and the second one actually gets it to where it needs to be, but like the first one is so interesting because it's a pretty short list. I think it's only like 20, like maybe just over 20 cars or something like that. And they're all the stock versions, for the most part, of famous cars, like of performance cars, right? Especially JDM stuff. So like you have a Mitsubishi Lancer sedan, but you don't have the Evo. It's just like now sometimes that's fun, sometimes that's kind of neat.
Quite
but the Lancer sedan is like the saddest base model of any car I think ever. Like having a Impreza 2.5 RS, which is in this game, like that's cool. Like just a regular bug eyes and SCI, I'm like, okay, I'm all right with that. But like the base Lancer is just sad. You can make a cool sleeper car though, which is decent. Like right, you wouldn't expect it to have Evo like performance. It's pretty strange. A lot of these cars are just they're just base models of cars. You also, so yeah, you don't have the WRX STI, you don't have the Evo, but then you do have like, you have a Mark IV Supra and the R34 GTR, which I imagine that R34 GTR, which I haven't gotten to a point in the game where I could drive that, must be so much faster stock than everything else. But you know, you could take pretty much anything to the top in this game, right? So
yeah, I guess that is a good positive about it at some point, because the game already struggles from a lack of variation and like custom elements. So the fact that you can kind of pave your own career path. I think somebody in our Discord said they were trying to do a stock Neon run through the entire game, and the fact that you can do that is pretty commendable to a certain extent. But if you want to be critical, the flip side of that is that there's genuinely no point in trying to, outside of those events that mandatorily require it, there's no point in applying customizations and that sort of thing, since you can kind of get through the majority of the game just by using the stock car.
Yeah. So, you know, going from that to the second game where there's, you know, the list looks like it's basically double, just like quickly scanning it. And now you actually have the Evo 8, as it were. And, you know, you have a 3000 GT, Pontiac GT. You actually have performance cars now, which is nice. One thing that we should have touched on is that there were a few cars that were exclusive per region, and actually one of those was the Corsa, or the Corsa. What car did you say you started with? Was it that, or
so I started with the 206, the Peugeot. I think that's in all the versions.
Yes,
isn't it?
yeah, that one's in all the
Vauxhall
versions.
Corsa.
Yeah,
and then the Opel. I think it'll be the Opel Corsa for European versions as well. I don't know if they got the Vauxhall or it was rebranded to Opel.
I think they did, depending on where in Europe the game was released, or maybe what language you selected. But yeah, I think that was pretty funny. Also, the Peugeot 106 in 2, which is like, I would have loved to drive a Peugeot 106. The 106 is such a cute car. Cool. It's great.
I was so happy when I seen that, like, as one of the starter cars as well.
It actually shows up, interestingly enough, just before the show is playing UG2, and it shows up in like one of those like tooltip like loading screen things. And it's like, but I see a car, I'm like, that's not in the game though. Like in my version of the game.
Wow.
Yeah. So
what exclusive did the American version have?
So we had the Acura RSX, which is just the Integra, you know, that generation Integra. We had the Honda Civic. I'm just scanning the list.
The Civic SI is in the first game in Underground though in Europe, isn't it? Like, because if I remember, unless it was just the version, maybe the version I was emulating actually, because I didn't go back to my actual hard copy. But I remember using the Civic in the first game, but maybe it was an American ROM.
Yeah, I don't know where I'm looking now. I can't say. I was looking through all of this yesterday, and the cutting room floor is a good resource for this kind of thing always. But yeah, so I mean, it's only like 2 cars per region that are exclusive, but when you want to drive
the
those
106
cars,
is the star there. I think that's like such an inspired choice as well. The Corsa is an inspired choice, but not for the reason that everybody wants to drive it, just because it's like EA must have went, what's the most popular hatchback in the UK and in Europe, I guess. It must have been popular as Opel out there as well.
Right.
And they've just put it in there because it's a car you wouldn't expect to see in a racing game outside of Gran Turismo, for example. So it was really cool to see it in there. It just looks so like shabby when you put all the mods and stuff on it though, so it's a good laugh.
Yeah, I mean, I did not grow up in a place where we had courses, but I am aware that it was very much like a, you know, kind of like a rite of passage of, you know, the tuner culture in Europe at the time. So that's pretty cute.
Oh, absolutely.
And I do appreciate that. But then it's also kind of funny to see it driving around the place, like, you know, these are basically like LA or something, right? So it seems a little bit out of the place.
Somebody's got a Corsa, naturally.
Yeah, right. Just in the middle of Hollywood.
Yep.
Yeah. Now I'm back on that Need for Speed soundtrack website. The second game's got a lot of good stuff too, we have to say, because the Snoop Dogg version of Riders on the Storm is an incredible
masterpiece.
Yeah, piece of art. Yeah, it's really amazing. So good. You got Lean Back, another banger. I love Skindred. That Skindred song's really good. I've seen the band The Bronx, actually. It was the loudest concert I've ever been to in my life. They're a punk band, and I couldn't hear for 3 days. Also, the only time I've ever stage dove. So, yeah, good picks in this game as well, has to be said.
Yeah, the first time I played this game, I was like a massive fan of Celebration song. I think it's Unwritten Law.
Yeah.
Don't know why. Just like what there's always one song, isn't there, for like childhood games, and it always just sticks in your head. And I just remember sitting outside the Bayview Burger King listening to Celebration song. Very odd memories, and that is the type of daft shit that's hard not to recall when you revisit these games, because when we try to do a podcast on it talking about how it holds up and how well it plays and stuff, part of you does just want to throw everything to the wind and say, it's an icon, like it's Need for Speed Underground. But yeah, it's a game that once again left a huge cultural impact, and I think a lot of people credit Underground 2, as in like kind of mainstream type games fans and stuff, would credit Underground 2 as being the open world racing game. Obviously, that's a discussion in its own right, since Midnight Club is probably like Midnight Club does it personally, truth be told.
Yeah.
But like a lot of people would argue that Underground 2 is the first, well, not the first, but rather the best game at actually conveying that to a wider audience. But I think that's the thing about Underground as a series. If we're talking about that side of things in terms of closing comments about the series as a whole, I think that it has a lot more cultural impact than other racing games within this space, and it was definitely Underground's influence that created all the kind of Me Too's, I think, in terms of game series that wanted to replicate that same type of environment, that same type of feel. I know Midnight Club was super popular as well, but I feel as if Underground was definitely like the poster boy for this type of game.
Yeah, I mean, this was the one that I think most people played. This was the one that was also like truly multi-platform, whereas like you didn't have a Midnight Club. Rockstar was not releasing games on GameCube, to my knowledge. This was the one that most people experienced, and I don't know. In my view, like I think that, again, I think they're good games, but I feel like there's something there that's lacking. Maybe there's a sense of authenticity that we kept talking about with Midnight Club that I just don't get from this game. It feels, and this is going to sound harsh, and I think it was a good idea to couch these games in this world. It spoke to car culture, which has always been Need for Speed's thing. This was the first time they did it, so it was received sort of weirdly from some people, myself included at the time, but like, it makes total sense why they went this direction, but it seems almost a little bit opportunistic for that same reason. You know, it seems like...
Oh, absolutely. I feel as if it's like it's street racing sponsored by capitalism. Like it feels.
You got
like
Best Buy around every
me.
corner. You got Burger King. There's like ads like everywhere, just constant ads.
Yeah.
And at the time, that was cool. Like at the time, we didn't mind that. 100%. Yeah, but looking back,
I mean, I love it. Like there's a particular billboard in the first game with the McDonald's fries, and every time I look at it, it just takes me back to a different time period, man. It's just like the contrast and like colour in those fries is just perfect. But even outside of those parts, like if you think about the first game in terms of the upgrade packages you get, where it like lists like 5 manufacturers and stuff, like upgrade pack 1 has Guaredi this and Brembo brakes and all this type of stuff, and it's like it's just text on a screen. It doesn't actually materially impact anything.
Right.
But that's the thing. Like I think the difference is Midnight Club was about the street racing culture and atmosphere, and like you're saying, Need for Speed Underground was more of the opportunistic commercial side of. This is something that's getting popular. This is something that's a big movement in terms of all these manufacturers, part makers, that sort of thing. And let's be honest, like that is a big deal even today in terms of if you play Forza Horizon 5 and you get a fucking Forza Tech body kit on something, you're like, get this out of my face. Whereas if it's like Rocket Bunny are doing a body kit for the GT86 or something, you're like, oh, that's the shit. Like that's what we want. And even though Underground never quite goes that far in terms of its depiction of those types of brands, it definitely showed that Black Box at least had an idea about what people who want that type of experience might want to see, but maybe it isn't quite replicated in the actual gameplay loop.
Yeah, and at the time you didn't have anything to compare it to, so it was like just the fact that they let you change these parts on cars was enough to be like, wow, okay, like a level of personalization that just didn't exist in other games. And they were even right to be like, okay, you know, you have to do this to progress in the game, because they wanted it to feel meaningful. And they were also of the mind that, like, you're playing Need for Speed Underground, why wouldn't you want to put a stupid body kit on the Corsa? You know, that was the idea. So this is one of those games that it just wasn't for me, and that's why I missed it at the time. It's funny when you go back and sort of read some interviews. I found this one from IGN in the lead up. This was at E3 before the first Underground released, and they were talking to like the main designer behind it, and they even go into like, you know, well, how did Black Box end up on this? And he was like, well, you know, we at EA Vancouver took a hard look at how we were developing our driving games and decided that in order to get the highest possible quality, we needed to consolidate our resources. So we brought in one of the best third-party developers in the world, and we made them the backbone of the Need for Speed franchise. And I don't know. As someone who loves Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, I think it is such a great game, and I like that they became, you know, it's like, right, you did an exceptional job. You are the Need for Speed guys now. It really speaks to the work that they did, and I know the Black Box era wasn't always great. I know it started out really hot and it didn't really end there, but you got to hand it to them for really, I think, cultivating the Need for Speed that people remember and love during the 2000s. Because if they didn't do this, if they didn't change, that series might be like, you know, might be PGR. It might be, you know, name any racing game series that's gone by the wayside. But they stayed with the time, so, you know, more power to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Whilst you were kind of looking at interviews and stuff as well, Adam, I did my usual and checked out some of the Metacritic reviews from the time, and like at the very bottom of critical reviews, it's funny because this was a very high recurring trend in racing game reviews up until like 2012, I like to say, but basically Games TM gave it a 5 out of 10, the first game, and said, boy racers will love Underground's edgy urban chic. Otherwise, you should stick with the less fashionable but ultimately more enjoyable Burnout 2. So it's just like that. Those are not like similar experiences, or like you don't have to choose one or the other, but it felt like for so long in racing games that was always the case. It was like, you shouldn't play Ridge Racer, it's no Gran Turismo.
It's no Gran Turismo. I mean, even on the back of the Ridge Racer Type 4 box, there was a quote from like Game Fan, they're saying like, it puts GT2 to shame. Like, what? Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what, both these games, no damage, which would have been hell to pay for any reviewer in the 2000s to have a racing game without damage, especially when Hot Pursuit had damage. Hot Pursuit 2 had damage, but they, I imagine with all the parts and everything, it was just they hadn't put the resources into it. Yeah. There's
a fantastic user review as well that I highlighted, and I have to read it. So this was a 10 out of 10 from Ramesses D back in 2004. This game is the best ever because I street race in real life and it feels just like that. I dive in Integra, so that's my car. And Midnight Club 2 can suck my dick because you can't put your car how you want it in Midnight Club 2. So if you don't know, now you know for sure.
Oh my god. What was that? Oh god. That one awful fan fiction that was like, I'm Gerard Tiffany Way. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's just like, it's like a Harry Potter fan fiction. I can't remember what the hell it's called, but anyone who's listening knows exactly what I'm talking about right now. That's what that reminds me of. I dive in Integra. Oh boy.
Yep. And then, yeah, I feel as if those two reviews stood out to me the most because it had that kind of bingo card of a racing game being compared against another racing game for no reason. And then that kind of brassness of just like flat out lying on the internet without a cause that you would see in the early 2000s. Just like, I street race in real life, I drive an Integra, just like throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Well, Ramesses, I hope you still drive that Integra.
I hope he still has it, yeah.
Yeah, I hope he's still doing well, and I don't know, maybe he can round to Midnight Club 2 eventually, or maybe he's still like he's not interested in that one. But yeah, it's an interesting time because I feel as if the games themselves, I feel as if now more than ever people are willing to say that perhaps they're overrated or that sort of thing, whereas I think even 3-4 years ago it was a very controversial thing to say. And that's the thing, like it's all those intrinsic memories that build up, and the thing about emulation that always makes me laugh is like you'll spend hours trying to get something to work perfectly and then you spend 10 minutes playing the vast majority of those games unless they're the really upper echelon of it. I feel as if that's the way Underground is, that people will fight to the death for it, some people who really love it, but when it comes to actually going back and playing it, probably don't give it that much time. It definitely has its place, and every time a new Need for Speed game gets announced, people want the remaster, people want the HD remakes, people want the Underground 3, if you don't consider 2015 Underground 3. But yeah, it's interesting because it kind of intrinsically impacts Unbound as well, just by the use of that UN like at the start of the subtitle. Yeah, I mean that's something in its own right, and I guess we will talk about that when it comes out, because on that point on Heat, you've always been a good avid supporter of that game, to be fair, Adam. I even remember when it first came out, you talked very highly of it, and I think it was in one of the Christmas pods when we were talking, or New Year pods, it might have been that year.
Yeah,
when that came out, and you said that was the best racing game you'd played that year, if I remember right, or it was up there at least. I think that was the year that I had said same for WRC 9.
It's been 2019, I think. So yeah.
So I mean, you've always felt that way, so that's why it's interesting, because the way it always goes with these games is that a few years passes and people think about it a bit more and they say, you know what, that was actually pretty good, that was actually pretty great, and you're probably seeing now more people open to that idea that Heat is actually a pretty high benchmark compared to initial trepidation when the game first came out.
Yeah, it's just something like, it's just kind of so hard for me. It's one of those things that like you hear as an argument. It's not even an argument, it's just like better than, right? Or not better than. And it's just like, why? And then, there won't be any exposition on that because no one feels that they have to make that argument because Underground's so iconic. It's like, look, you can feel whatever you feel, you can think whatever you think, obviously, but it's like, I need a little bit more. I need to know why. Like, I kind of wanted to end this to talk about like why these games didn't work for me and why I like Most Wanted so much by comparison, because Most Wanted builds on these games pretty directly. It's visually, stylistically a big change because now it's daytime. But I think the open world is just so much more varied in Most Wanted 2005, and I think it really worked because it was this understanding from EA, from Black Box rather, that like we don't have to play favorites here. We don't have to pit the tuners against the people who like to drive Lamborghini. Like, we can just make a game that has everything that, like, if you liked any of the past Need for Speeds, there will be something here for you. And I think like MW 2005 like united those fan bases in a way that's like very hard to do. And that was all I needed. Like, okay, you're giving me cars I actually want to drive. And I love Japanese sports cars, but like, I'm sorry, I don't want to drive like a stock Lancer. So like, you're giving me like performance cars I want to drive. You're giving me a world that feels rich and like actually like parts of it like feel beautiful. Like, there's nothing in Underground that like kind of stops me in my tracks. Whereas I remember like there were points like on the highway weaving through the mountains and everything like that in Most Wanted that felt really special. And you have those cop chases, and the cop chases, like, they were that element of surprise and variability. They were that X factor that Underground just didn't have. But you could get into one of those epic cop chases that would just last you like an hour in 2005, and like it, those are the things I remember from that game, and that's an experience I could never have with these. And so I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, because like there are certain pieces missing here that would be filled in the future. I think for people who didn't maybe enjoy these so much.
So did you consider like Carbon a step back in some ways then, like when that came out compared to more?
Yeah, I mean, it felt like they were it felt like almost like an overcorrection. Like they were like, oh, we went too much away from like what made Underground really big, even though like, I mean, Most Wanted, all these games sold really, really well. I think probably at Carbon they started to maybe hit a little bit of a downturn. But the thing about Carbon is like Black Box, it's funny. Their physics started out really like solid, and over time they got more unraveled. Like they tried to do too many things, or like, oh, we need to make like a Mustang handle completely differently than like any other car. Like it has its wheels in a different place or something. Like they just tried to do too much, especially in the physics side, and like they started to lose the core fundamentals. And I remember doing like drift events and like the toge in Carbon was like a neat idea, but the game didn't have the physics to back it up. So it's like this is a mode that rewards precision, and I don't want to drive on these mountain passes. So, but you I didn't know you were such a fan of Carbon. So.
Oh yeah, mate, I absolutely loved Carbon. Yeah. It's funny, the first version of that game I played was on the Wii.
Oh my god!
So I actually completed and played it on the Wii. It was one of the games I got like at launch, pretty much. So I think it was a launch title, if I remember right, or it was the following month. But yeah, that was like my post-Christmas game when I got the Wii, and like even playing it on there with the motion controls, I really enjoyed it. And then like I don't know if it was the same in the US, but the PlayStation 3 version of that game was so expensive, like in comparison to other games, and it's still to this day on eBay and stuff. It's still a bit of a high commodity if you've got one in terms of like what you can sell it for and stuff. I don't know if it's the same in the US.
Yeah.
So once I got the PS3 version a lot later down the line, that was just like I fucking loved it, man. I really like the vibe of Carbon, and I loved the daft cutscenes, and I actually quite like the toge racing as well.
Okay.
I thought it was a good crux for the game, and it was cool having that type of gimmick race type tied to progression and that sort of thing. And
yeah.
It definitely kind of leaned into this idea that you were unlocking different parts of the map, that sort of thing. For me, Carbon actually delivers on like, and this is the caveat for me. I think I've said this before, but I've not actually played Most Wanted 2005 through to completion myself. Mm-hmm. It's one of those weird blank spots in my racing game history that I need to address and experience, since I've played 2012 and I really enjoyed 2012 for my sins, some might say. Yeah, Carbon for me, like that is my ideal underground environment, because I feel as if you were talking about the fact you had the Lamborghini fans and you had the kind of street racer fans, and you were able to merge those together. I actually quite liked how Carbon made it combative on that basis. Like you could pursue whichever option you wanted, but I liked the fact that intrinsically tied to the storyline, it was this idea that the pretty boys drove the big bad sports cars, and the cool kids drove the tuners and stuff. It's such a tried and boring like comparison story,
and that's
type
the thing
but
that always always bothered me. I don't know. I mean, I can't even really say why. I think I just like loved all these cars and I wanted to drive all of them. Like it bothered me that it was always a way in a lot of these black box games where it was like anything that was American has to handle like shit. And it's like, I want to drive a Viper. Like, can I just enjoy fucking driving a Dodge Viper or a Corvette Z06? Like, that stuff really bothered me. But to be honest, like, when I played Carbon, that was one of the last games. I remember at the time we had one of those awful, I've talked about it a bunch of times. I talked about it on the last episode that we had with John and Andrew, because it was all tech-based. At the time, my family had a gigantic rear projection Hitachi TV. One of those, like, it's like extremely deep, and like after like, you know, a couple of years, the screen goes to shit and it's like super blurry. It was standard definition, and like it got to a point where like 2006, 2007, you have these next gen consoles are out. They're HD capable, and you try to plug them into an SD TV, especially a bad one, and you're using like, I hope we were using component, I don't know, but like the games were so blurry. And that room also, the room that TV was in, had a lot of windows, and it was always sunny, and a game like Carbon I couldn't see. It was just black and smeary and awful. So I did not experience Need for Speed Carbon in the best environment, safe to say. And maybe That might be an interesting one. I don't know if it's a game I want to play next because I feel like I've been playing a lot of Need for Speed lately. But that might be one to revisit.
Talking about a lot of Need for Speed as well.
Yeah.
I think but chat's kind of aligning with maybe your thoughts on that as well in terms of.
Yeah. Okay.
Everybody kind of has their own personal preference, and I like the idea of the turf war side coinciding with street racing because it ties up a nice kind of narrative oversight when these games try to take themselves super seriously, when you could probably solve all the issues by just offing the person who's doing street races if we're going to go down the legality route. So I like this idea that they kind of tied it more into that idea of trying to capture each area. It was a good way of kind of keeping the game interesting and also tying it into car classes. It doesn't make sense from an automotive perspective, but from the kind of purposes of Need for Speed Carbon's type world, I quite liked the idiotic idea of it. I do agree that they probably shouldn't make it so that means you never want to drive certain cars, which is absolutely the case. But I think from a cheese narrative point of view, it's pretty funny to imagine that nobody drives Ferraris except guys wearing long fucking grey trench coats and gelled hair. And
Did you like the narrative in that game? And to that point, did you like, especially when you played the game as a kid, did you get sucked into narratives in these underground games?
Oh, well, not so much 1 and 2 at all, really. Okay. I wonder if that's just being a little bit on the too young side to care about narrative and more just interested in the cars.
Yeah.
Carbon, I could definitely form an opinion on it, and I like the cast of characters in Carbon just because I love how over the top Darius is, for example, as the big bad. Obviously, Cross making his appearance from Most Wanted at the start as well. The cool little kind of throwback in there, and then just throughout it, it's like they went for all the kind of correct stereotypes that at that time period are somehow not too offensive either, which is a rarity. Like they didn't pull a Midnight Club in some scenarios in terms of going down maybe too far, contextualising people based on nationality and stuff, but it's as if they kind of looked at driving films and racing films of the time, including Fast and Furious obviously, and tried to pick up people who would be involved in this kind of overly cheesy turf war type scenario. And it's pretty fun and engaging for what it is. It's not going to win any Oscars, obviously. But just because somebody's mentioned it in the chat as well, I think I've said as much before, but I also liked 2015's loose narrative. I liked the camaraderie between all the kind of different drivers and such. I loved the kind of injection of the kind of real life drivers like Ken Block and stuff in there. It added a nice wee bit of dynamism to that world. So in many ways 2015 for me was kind of taking what they had in Carbon and pushing it even further, but I wouldn't even call it a narrative though. That's the thing in 2015. I feel as if it's more of a showing your friends street racing, and that's kind of the extent of it. There's a little bit of drama in there, kind of human to human drama, but it doesn't seem as if there's ever kind of storyline drama.
2015 is one of those awful games for me to remember where it's God, if you handled a little bit better
oh well, yeah,
you'd be you had every beat, you nailed the vibe, you nailed all of these things, you had they did that weird thing where they were mixing real people and synthesized backgrounds or whatever. It's it actually looked kind of cool. Everything they were doing was they were barking up the right tree on a stylistic design brief basis, but the physics just completely fell apart. Could they just make that game, remaster that game and replace it with hopefully better physics? There you go.
It is so interesting how botched the physics are, but I still played that game for 40 hours or something as well, just because just such a nice place to be. Like we talked about with the characters, it's just that you and your friends just kind of having fun, as opposed to trying to take down a big bad or take over the street racing world, that sort of thing. I really love the soundtrack in 2015 as well. It hits that nice kind of in that era they could have got the soundtrack so wrong, but I love the way that they actually managed to blend all the different genres pretty well, so it isn't too drum and bass heavy, it isn't too kind of rap heavy, it's a nice kind of mix in there. I like the Instagram filter as well, in terms of the way that paints the graphics, because you can still go back to that game and be at certain angles and certain types of kind of light off the kind of street and stuff and be like, holy shit, like that does look very real.
Yeah.
Very 2015 does a thing I think a lot of racing games have to consider, and it's like, you don't have to have your racing game like completely like in scope covering daytime, nighttime, evening time, sunrise, sunset. Choose a theme and style that makes the game look great and run with it. Like there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And I feel as if 2015, like I always remember it's what we do as like racing game fans in general, but people were immediately shitting on the fact that it wasn't a 24/7 kind of day-night cycle, and how like, oh, that's pathetic and all that sort of thing. But like when you return to that game, it's one of those rare titles that only ever sticks to the types of conditions it looks fantastic in, and that's one of the reasons why it's so fun to go back to and see that those visuals still hold up pretty well.
Yeah, well, that's why a lot of games, like, I mean, that's why Drive Club just gets to a point where it's like every event is like some horrible, weather event, because like that game always looks so good in the rain, and it looks good in the sun too, but when it's like a little bit overcast, depending on the time of day, sometimes when the lighting's flat, it just isn't convincing.
I think it's the very first race in that game. It's like the Mercedes-Benz hatchback at India or something, and it's like full daytime, murky, just like it looks so crispy. Like that's what the Drive Club, isn't it?
I've seen. There's an image that's gone around of, I think, that particular race that has been infamous. But that game looks so good in other contexts that I don't even care.
Yeah, exactly. It's a non-point. It's just funny when, like, especially since like that was when I got my PS4 and it was the first game I booted up. It was like, oh, what the hell's going on here? And then it quickly fades away as you go through the game.
Right.
But we've pretty much talked about a kind of roundtable of other titles outside Underground off the back of that discussion.
Yeah. I think it's worth talking about, though, and I also think it'd be cool to maybe do, we had a couple of 7 out of 10 maybe we only had the one 7 out of 10 racers episode, and in my head I'm thinking it was a longer thing, but I think like a 7 out of 10, like maybe not even 7 out of 10, just all the other street racers where we play like Juiced, Street Racing Syndicate. I think there was a Fast and Furious game at one point, just like everything else that was out at that time that nobody played, because like. I mean, people listening have, but most people just played Underground. Because it'd be interesting to kind of pick out aspects where those games maybe introduced something that maybe the rest of the industry might have done well to pick up on. But yeah, it's 2002 through like 2007. This was like the only racing game that felt like that people were really playing that really mattered outside of like Gran Turismo. And it really encapsulated an era. And, we could spend another probably like 20 minutes talking about Unbound. We don't have to do that, but I think we're definitely going to have an Unbound episode between now and Christmas when that game comes out. And, I am cautiously optimistic because, as we've said, I really enjoyed Heat. I don't know how I feel about the art style, but I also don't think that we can really pass a judgment until we see it in motion. So, that I'm just my head.
And that's proven harder than you would think based on the marketing materials so far.
Well, look, my mind is open, and ultimately I won't really care how the game looks to a certain extent if they fix some of the other issues like the handling. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But just when we're talking about weird street racing games, I believe we may have talked about it before, but I was just curious quickly if you played Street Supremacy on the PSP.
So that was a Tokyo Extreme Racer, right, on the PSP. I have not. I remember I considered buying it when I had the PSP at the time, and I didn't, because back then I didn't like TXR because I was stupid. But now I've gone back and
it got panned, man, as well. Like, it's not as if you were alone with that thought. It's like critically, it was an absolute bomb.
Yeah.
Like, I think that was a pretty common. It's weird, isn't it? TXR. It's like at one point it just clicks for you, and it's like, oh shit, this is like fantastic. And yeah, Street Supremacy is definitely in that category of game we were talking about. I think just because it's a PSP TXR, like holy shit. It's funny thinking back on how cool it would have been having that if you were a fan of the series.
Yeah, I think once you sort of internalize the issues that series always had, and you accept them for what they are, and you can kind of get past that and see like there's just something so pure and the complete opposite of the opportunism that we're maybe talking about with Underground, coming from Genki, because Genki was nothing if not, very, very pure and of a singular vision. Whether or not they always achieved that vision was another story, because they produced some of the best racing games and simultaneously some of the worst. And you never really knew what you were going to get out of Genki. But
No, of course not. And for a company that focused specifically on that genre, it's funny when you see lines from reviews this time. Street Supremacy, somebody at IGN said, easily one of the worst racing games I've ever laid my hands on, bar none. And that's for a development studio that focuses on racing games. Like, it's so funny that they're that divisive.
Yeah. Well, Acquire 86 right here saying they love it and it has the worst speed feeling of all racing games. I don't even...
Now you've got to play it. Got to play it.
Yeah. Oh my god. I will. We'll yeah. That'll be part of our discussion of Street Racers that didn't quite make it.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, I guess that'll do it for this episode, right? So that's about
I think
everything.
so, mate. Yeah, I think we've covered it off pretty nicely.
I forget how long, because when I stream, I'm used to it being longer, but now I realize it's been like an hour and a half. So this has been something of a mega episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We'll definitely have a Need for Speed Unbound show, and then I won't make any promises about anything aside from the Christmas cast, because that's the one that we know we're doing, and that's gonna be all hot takes based. I mean, maybe not all, who knows, but that's gonna be the main driver. So, Bren, do you
kind of want to stream that one as well, just to see
we should, yeah, yeah, we absolutely should. So definitely find that tweet. Bren, you put out a tweet, Kaz asking you for your hottest opinion, and it'll keep us warm during the winter months for sure.
Well, absolutely, and I've already, and amongst the multitude of continuous Forza Horizon based takes, there is some good stuff out there. Yeah. It's just crazy how that series just dominates those type of posts. Like, it's wild. But there are some really interesting ones in there I've seen, and I cannot wait to get into them.
Yeah, there's a lot of... I think what amazes me more than anything else is that, like, people can have, like... I don't think Forza Horizon is good, actually, and think that that's a hot take. Because I guess in the grand scheme of things, it is a hot take, because a lot of people love Forza Horizon, but if you have ever followed us, like...
It's the same people as well. Like, I get it if it's like new faces, fair enough.
Right.
But it's the same people from last time saying it again.
You're preaching to the choir, you know. But that's how it goes sometimes. All right. Well, thank you again for listening to Time Extend. Thank you, because we had our if you're listening over the podcast, you may have forgotten this was a live show. So thank you to everyone here who was here. Acquire, Chris, good to see you. Thunder, all great. And we'll have some more live shows in the future. Go follow us at time_extend on Twitter if you don't already. Our Twitch is just Time Extend. As we use it more, that'll be important.
Will be.
All right. And that's going to do it. So thanks again, guys.
Yeah. Cheers for listening, guys.